Hey everyone, my name is Escobar, and today I'm going to be talking about wireless networks from the offensive side and the defensive side. So you want to hack some Wi-Fi. As you can see in the corner here, these are the boxes that we use to remotely test our clients' wireless networks. But before I get into any of that, one quick thing I want to throw out there is that imposter syndrome is real. And so this talk is going to be authentic. You're going to get the ums, the uhs. Nobody is perfect. And I think it's always an important thing to say when you're talking to the security community that if you're a noob and you don't really know what you're doing or you don't think that you do, everybody feels that way. I definitely still feel that way. So yeah, with that, I'll get on with the rest of this talk. So a lot of our clients, they do what's called external penetration testing, internal penetration testing, and application tests. Basically, external tests you can think of that is testing somebody's external network, like you're coming in from the public internet, right? The internal penetration test is maybe like a threat actor in your network already, simulating maybe a malicious link that was clicked or a rogue employee. And then your application test, if your company has a specific web application or form or maybe a mobile application that they use. These are the three main tests that most clients get. They get these three, just out of the box tests because that's what they think their whole network covers and encompasses. And a lot of the times they leave out wireless testing. They think, you know what, maybe we can just skip it. They think, hey, it's not quite in the budget, so let's just leave it, right? And I hope to change some minds and change some hearts here. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of it. So I'm going to be talking about this from an adversarial perspective, and then also a defensive one. But first, adversarial because that's what I do. I'm on an adversary group team at SecureWorks Adversary Group. We call ourselves SWAG. And so it's interesting, I think, even from a blue team perspective or somebody who's defending a network's perspective, whether it's for a corporate network or even just for your home, to know how a threat actor, thinks and, the things that they see when they go into a building or when they're trying to target, you or your company. And really a wireless network is just an extension of typically your corporate network. It's typically not much different. End users have to have laptops, they have to have devices that connect into all other resources and internal applications. And what's awesome for me is that your wireless network typically extends past your building. And especially if you have, a Yagi antenna or a dish antenna or some directional antenna that increases the gain in such a way that I can access your Wi-Fi from a long ways away. So if you look at this picture here, you can see, hey, this might just be me on a park bench, sitting outside this car dealership, trying to get at their Wi-Fi. Now, the best part about this is that there's no cameras that are going to pick me up. There's no badges I have to try and clone and get past. I don't need, full access to the inside of, of your facility, Ethernet ports, USB ports, computers. I don't need any of that. And typically with our clients, a lot of the logging that they do is focused on their firewalls and their perimeter. And rightly so, those are really important things to look at. But that leaves a big security gap, a big gap there that somebody like myself can take advantage of. And the other thing that's interesting too is that WIPs and WIDs are typically not monitored. And if you're not familiar with what that vernacular is, WIPs stands for wireless intrusion prevention, and WIDs is wireless intrusion detection. So you're probably more familiar with IPS and IDS if you're coming from a network, understanding or standpoint. And basically what those tools do, or what the parts of those applications do, is they sit on top of your wireless controller and they look at all the wireless traffic that's being generated, and they detect anomalies in the form of the IDS, or they prevent them if it's an actively attacking situation. There's some good tools out there on the market. But what's interesting is that I very seldom see them monitored. I very seldom see them, even pick something up. I had a client a few weeks ago that, I had a rogue access point. I got a whole bunch of end users credentials, and there was a finding in the report that said, hey, no intrusion prevention or intrusion detection set up. And they go, well, what do you mean? We had it logged. Look, I can go pull up the logs and show, the MAC addresses of those, rogue access points. And I said, yeah, but you never notified me. You had to go back through and look at it. And so that's not active. That's, I already had the keys to the kingdom and was out the door before you knew that anything was actually happening. And so it's one of those things that's the perfect spot for an adversary. That's the perfect spot for a threat actor, is to be in a place where it's not heavily monitored, to where you can still gain access to a lot of stuff. And it's not something that's in full focus, right? You're going through the side door versus trying to cross the moat, so to say. And so like there's a lot of benefits to being a wireless adversary, to being a wireless attacker. Like I said before, it's really easy to stay anonymous. I can stay at a site. And the other thing is too is that if I like open up documents or access credentials or do something like that, I don't have to worry about exfiltrating that from your network. I don't have to worry about trying to get that data off, into some command and control infrastructure, because it's all on my device that's most likely in my pocket or in my backpack. And I also don't need any of that internal access to take a poke at your wireless. This is something that I used to use a while ago. Right now, this is more upgraded, but basically this is just a 5-volt battery, rechargeable battery, a Raspberry Pi, and then a wireless adapter. Since then, this kit has been upgraded pretty heavily. Now it's Pi 4s, now it's Pandas that can do both 2.4 gigahertz and 5.8 gigahertz frequencies. The battery's even a little bit bigger, and I'll show you that in the next couple slides. But really, just something this simple: $100 worth of gear off Amazon is all that it takes, to fully compromise somebody's network. It's not expensive at all. I took a setup almost identical to this to a large company, sat in their cafeteria, and as all of their researchers and scientists came and sat down in the cafeteria for lunch, I was collecting credentials left and right. And it was just one of those things that it was kind of unbelievable that a company that has hundreds and if not billions of dollars to spend on security and IT, could be brought down, or at least maybe not brought down, but have credentials stolen and information stolen with just $100 and a little bit of know-how. So again, thinking like an adversary, thinking about like, hey, you don't need all these really fancy gadgets when some just off the shelf stuff from Amazon and again YouTube videos to learn how it all works, is all you really need. And so the other nice part about this is that you can stand up an access point in your pocket that you can then use your phone to connect back to, or you could just have a hotspot in your pocket and use that as kind of like your go-between for this information. And so I use an app on my phone called Terminus, and what this app does is it basically just emulates an SSH or FTP connection or telnet connection, and so you can basically access your device over SSH, the Raspberry Pi over SSH, and do full control of it. And so again, this is easier to stay anonymous because now I'm not a dude with a laptop. Now I'm just a dude with a phone, just like everybody else. Only now I have access to a full operating system that's just living in my pocket. Again, I can stay at a site. There doesn't have to be any antennas visible. And yeah, there's no actual access that's required. I can just walk right through a public area where I know a lot of your employees are and capture a lot of information off of it. And again, this is just a screenshot of what my phone looks like during an engagement. So this is my friend Matt's backpack that we use on some of his engagements. And as you can see, if you look at this, yeah, there's some 3D printed stuff on the side of it, but really, if you were just walking through a crowd and he had that alpha antenna turned the other way to where it was just all black, you really wouldn't notice a whole lot there, right? Like it wouldn't really stick out. And you probably, when you look at this, you're probably only looking at the little green bits of 3D printed alpha antenna that you can see right there and maybe the gold bits. But what you probably also don't see is this 9 dB antenna threaded right through there. And then this panda right here that's underneath it. So even though what might stick out initially is 2 antennas, really what you have, or 2 wireless adapters, you actually have 4 wireless adapters just on this backpack, just on the outside. And again, if you wanted to go super stealth, you could just put that directly in your backpack and no one would be the wiser. This is what it looks like when you open it up on the inside. It's basically just 2 10,000 milliamp hour batteries hooked up to some Raspberry Pis that do all the controlling and have the actual adapters on board. And that's all that's right here, right? Again, maybe just a couple $100. Like honestly, the backpack is probably the most expensive thing out of that entire kit. Not even the electronics involved. But that's how an adversary thinks. This is how an adversary, would just walk through your building or potentially just walk through your parking lot, collecting all this information, and to you, just hey, some individual with a backpack. And it doesn't have to be a backpack. It could be a briefcase. It could just be anything. Honestly, I've put wireless adapters in just coffee cups. Right, like a little like cheap plastic coffee cup. I've even thrown a Raspberry Pi away in a trash can and then come back and retrieve it. Or if I wanted to, I guess I could have had, the janitorial service would have thrown it out and gotten rid of, all of that for me. Kind of expense is not something I would want to do, but if you're a nation state or if you're an adversary with some deep pockets, you wouldn't blink twice at, the data that you could compromise with just $100 if that were only a one-time use sort of thing. And so all that to say, now, so that's adversary, that's my adversary hat on of just like, what does this look like? What could somebody bad do? What do they think like? And that's not always super helpful when there's not, there's not something that can be really done about it. And really all that comes back to is monitoring your access points, right? Use good passwords if you have a pre-shared key network, if you have WPA2, PSK. But other than that, if you monitor for rogue access points, if you have any type of enterprise network, that'll go so far to at least, knowing that, hey, something is going on. So I've mentioned it a couple of times offhand, rogue access point. All a rogue access point is just an access point that you don't control. Now, technically, this means that any access point is a rogue access point, right? So if somebody has like a little hotspot, or if somebody has a router that they plug in, from home, those are all technically rogue access points. But the hard part is then distinguishing, what rogue access points are actually dangerous. Which ones do you discern? Do you alert on every access point that is rogue? Now, if you are in, like, say, a shared workspace, that's going to be really hard, and you're going to get a ton of alerts. And that's why a lot of our clients ignore alerts that come from rogue access point detection, because they're detecting off of every single other access point that they don't own that's within their airspace. And again, in a crowded area, that could be thousands of alerts, a minute. However, maybe the ones that you only care about are access points that are designed to trick your end users into connecting to them. Or maybe they're designed into coercing credentials out of them. And maybe that is done in such a way that, it looks similar to what your Wi-Fi looks like. So I'll take you on a quick example of how I do what I do. So this is a tool that I've used in the past called Wi-Fi Fisher. All it does is this kicks up a captive portal, not dissimilar to if you've ever stayed at a hotel, gone on an airplane, or used any public Wi-Fi where, something will pop up in front of your face and it says, hey, you need to click agree, or you need to type in a passcode, or you need to do something. Attackers like myself can utilize basically that same technology, that same feature set, to coerce end users into providing credentials. So you can see that what this tool does is it will kick somebody off of the good wireless network, the one that they're supposed to be connected to, and then it will then coerce the end user into connecting to mine because it has a higher signal strength, and it appears like, hey, this is going to be potentially a faster connection, right? And so what will pop up on their phone is you can see the up top, the Microsoft, redirect, similar to like the Apple captive portal or anything on your phone. And what this application does is it looks at the user agent, looks at the device that's connecting to it, and it says, hey, if this is an iPhone, I'm going to present a different prompt. But if I were to connect to it on a Windows 10 device, it's going to pop up the screen that says, oh, no internet connection. You need to enter in your network security key. Now, if you're a seasoned security individual, you're probably going to see past this, right? You're probably going to see, oh, whatever. You type in the security key here, and this is all just, based on the browser. It's not actually popping up from the menu. But if you don't have a sophisticated user, if you don't have somebody who knows to look for something like this, or or we all have individuals in our lives that just blindly click on things in emails that you really wish they wouldn't have. And if they were to do this and enter in that network security key, or your passphrase, that's all that somebody like me as an attacker needs to then access your network remotely, to access your network from that park bench, getting into your company. And so just something this simple, it seems like, oh, that was really easy. Like, I can't believe somebody would be fooled by it, but it happens all the time and it works all the time. And if it works, attackers are going to keep doing it. But in order to carry out this attack, I needed to stand up my own access point that I control as an attacker. And so as a defender, what you can then do is basically have detection in place. If you're using Aruba, if you're using Cisco, if you're using Ubiquiti, all of these platforms have their own version of intrusion detection or intrusion prevention that look for these rogue access points that could do this sort of attack. And when I say rogue access points, a lot of times people just think, oh, they cloned, the same Wi-Fi name. So say your home Wi-Fi is, Eric123, right? If I were going to try and compromise you, I might make an exact same SSID that is Eric123. And I kind of have this chart that I use in our engagements that shows um, the difficulty of different rogue access points. So you have the SSID. So SSID is just what you see when you connect to it on your phone. That's your home Wi-Fi name. Then the MAC address is actually the hardware address of that access point, and that's important because that's how all these devices know to connect to each other. It's basically like their physical address, like your house address. They need to know where to deliver the mail to, the packets to. And so something that's super easy is throw up an obvious MAC address like 00112233, because that's not a real MAC address of anything out there, and that probably doesn't match the normal address scheme of whatever wireless access points your company or your house run. So that's a pretty easy one to catch. Honestly, a person just scrolling through the logs could most likely catch that. But then you have, an exact match and maybe a random MAC address, so that's not something that somebody could just pick out of the logs by looking at it. What happens if I have an exact match of your SSID and then similar to known access points? So, hey, maybe this access point belonged to a different group or a different controller, and maybe it's totally fine. It looks like it belongs. Harder to pick out with the eyes, right? If you're just somebody that's scrolling through logs. So we're getting in the more difficult of this section. So now what happens if you have a company that has multiple branches, and you cloned a MAC address from one site to another site? So from branch A to branch B, is your controller going to be able to distinguish, hey, which of these sites is this MAC address coming from? Is it actually bad? Then what happens if I do it from the same site? So say you have a large warehouse like a Costco, and there's an access point on one side of the Costco and the access point on the other side of the Costco. If I clone one, if I know what one MAC address is, stand up a rogue access point on the complete opposite side of that Costco with that other rogue access point, will your wireless controller be able to distinguish, hey, that there is a geographical distance between these two? Again, we're just going down the difficulty scale, and I don't have to go all the way down to the craziness of not an exact SSID, and that sort of thing. But these are the ways that an attacker like myself thinks. But really, the low hanging fruit is if you could just detect when a random access point comes up that matches your exact SSID, you're going to cover 95% of all attackers that are ever going to look at your network. And so it's one of those things that I'm looking at this as an adversary, and I'm looking at this as somebody who's trying to defend their network. And you're never going to get 100% coverage for absolutely everything, but 95% is pretty good, especially for the tools that are out there and how long they take to configure. And sure, you have to tune them a little bit, but that's like every tool. The goal of this talk is really just to show that this is important, not basically to say that it's the be all end all, because it's not. This is my old Linksys 54G, but the picture derailed me. So when you have a corporation or maybe just a home network, typically you have a guest network and you have a home network or a corporate network, and maybe some other network for printers or your thermostat, right? And so things to keep in mind are how does your guest network work? Does your guest network allow users of your network to access other devices like printers? Should devices on that guest network be allowed to talk with one another, or should they just be allowed internet access? These are all things to take into consideration because they give different security levels. And an example of this is, say and so this is an example of the real world of something I've actually done. Is there is a company that has a guest network and they have a corporate network. All the laptops, that belong to the corporate network obviously are on the very strong, WPA2 enterprise with certificates. Everything was plumbed up perfectly on their corporate side. However, on their guest side, there was no client isolation or segmentation. So what that means is that if I'm on the guest network and somebody else is on the guest network, I can talk to their machine and interact with their machine, just in the same way that they could talk back to me. And why that's powerful is that if I create some disturbance in the Wi-Fi force, if I send a bunch of deauthentication packets or malicious packets that kick everybody else off the corporate network, what's the first thing that they're probably going to do? They're probably going to want internet access, and the devices might even automatically kick over to the guest network. Well, now you have all of your corporate devices that have now connected this guest network with me, an adversary who's looking to compromise them. And so then I run a bunch of tools. We don't have to get into the little network or net pen of it all. But hey, if I'm sharing the same network segment as a bunch of other devices, there's a bunch of ways that I can get credentials out of that. And so that's one of those things. It's not super technical, but when you think about it, all that would have taken right there is client isolation to be in place so that other devices couldn't talk to other devices on the network, potentially malicious, threat actor like myself. So again, things to think about. Captive portals. Do you want to have captive portals so that you can, legally check the box that says yes, they have agreed that they will not, do bad things on this network, or do you leave them be? It's just one of these things that take all these things into consideration and just think about it for a split second of how would an attacker view this network, and what are my goals for standing up this network? Because just even thinking about it for even just a short period of time will help you to make more accurate determinations for what you want to do going forward, and help you just make better decisions in general. Another thing, and this is again something that I've done on the client side, and really, so I say all this not to be like, oh, look at me, I'm so good, I'm a hacker. I say this because these are all things that I've done to compromise our clients, and there are things that I don't want threat actors to compromise, somebody who doesn't, who doesn't have these defenses in place. So that's my goal in all this. Not to say, look at me, I can like break into all these companies, but just to say, hey, take this into consideration, because this is how I think. This is how other adversaries think. But so if you have like say G Suite, which is Google's cloud offering, or if say you have Office 365, which is really popular with a bunch of large companies. What they'll do typically is they'll have what's called trusted IP addresses, and so from Azure and Outlook and Office 365 and how all that stuff works, they say, hey, you know what? If you're coming from inside the building from a trusted public IP address, I think they're called trusted IPs or trusted addresses, something along those lines. You can Google it. It'll say, hey, we see you're coming from the building. So what we're going to do is we're not going to require you to do that pesky two-factor authentication thing. As long as you have your username and password, that's all you need. You're good to go. And why that's really dangerous is typically guest networks have the same outbound public IP address that the corporate network does. Maybe there's network segmentation so that the guest Wi-Fi can't talk to the corporate Wi-Fi, but if they have the same trusted public IP address, well, now if I have a username and password and I'm connected to the guest Wi-Fi, the Microsoft Azure or G Suite now think, hey, I'm just coming from inside the corporate network where I don't need multi-factor authentication. And just like that, now you're back to single factor authentication. And, then I can access your mailbox without being prompted for all the additional requirements, whether that's like push, whether that's a swipe, whether that's a face, whatever it is, I won't be asked for it. I'll just old school username and password. Again, this is something, how prevalent is this? I mean, not super prevalent, but could it be if you're a high value target or somebody really wants to get access to your data? It's something to at least consider. And that's all I'm asking from this is not, you need to implement these 5 things to be secure, but just take this into consideration when you're designing your network, whether that's just for your home, whether that's for maybe a small business that you help out, or maybe if you're, the CISO or CTO of like a large company, just take this stuff into account when when you're looking at it. So let's also talk about some other fun aspects of data that's just showed in the clear, and how even if your network is safe and secure and has all the different types of encryption and strong passwords and all that stuff, how there can still be data that's leaked out there. So what we're going to be looking at in this picture is MAC addresses, and so MAC addresses are basically that same hardware address. And every company, the first, 6 octets, the hex, those values that you see in red right there on your screen, those are unique to a company. They're unique to say, hey, all of our devices that we manufacture are all going to have this similar octet. Why does that matter? You're thinking, Eric, big whoop. It's like a serial number, as far as Wi-Fi goes. And sure, that's right. Probably doesn't matter a whole lot, but it does allow for information about the type of hardware that you're using, and so this this could allow identification of devices. It can even be used for identification of people. So if I can see that, hey, I know, that the person that I want to, maybe the CEO of this company, I'm trying to get their badge or their password. I can see that, his MAC address is like 18B430, right? Well, now I can track that user because they have a device that is basically, emanating a wireless signal that's saying, hey, track me, right? Now, one thing that's actually really positive is that in future, or not future, in like current releases of the iOS operating system and probably Android as well, you can randomize these MAC addresses every time you connect to a network. And so why that's great is that you can't be used and found and fingerprinted on a network if somebody's trying to follow you, throughout a building, throughout a parking lot, throughout a large space. These random addresses are really helpful in basically making that very hard to do, if not impossible to do. But what's also really interesting is that when I see all these devices connected to networks, it gives me a good feel for, for what that office layout looks like. And you might be thinking like, Eric, how given these numbers could you even, hope to think that you can know what the office layout is? So this top part of the screen where it says BSSID, that is, the actual access point. So from those I can know, hey, are you running Cisco, Aruba, Ubiquiti, Netgear, any of the big, Wi-Fi router, access point brands that you see out there? Because their octets are all unique to those companies, I can then say, hey, this is unique to this. I know that they're using Cisco gear. I know that they're using, this type of hardware. And then if you look on the bottom, these are the connections that are being made. And so the BSSID is the same as what you see up above, but the station is actually the device that is connecting back to that access point. And so I can take a look at it and say, out of these stations, I say, hey, there's a bunch of, Apple devices, maybe these are all MacBooks. So if you know that this company has a bunch of laptops and you're trying to discern, hey, do I need to craft a payload of some malware for the Apple operating system or like a Windows operating system, this can give you that insight right away. And again, this is all in clear text. You can, use AirDump, just to see all this traffic in your home, and that's it. It's all clear. There's not a way to obfuscate this or, other than randomly, assigning addresses to devices, which would be a huge pain and not really worthwhile. There's really not a good way to defend against this. But again, this is what an attacker is getting. They can know, hey, do you use primarily Apple products? Do you have, maybe some obscure piece of, Internet of Things hardware, like a smart toaster, smart fridge that could potentially be compromised. And so if you were to take a look at these ones specifically that I've highlighted, if you were to go and Google what the station is of that 18B4 that you see down below, you can, that's just a duplicate of that slide. You can basically say, hey, 18B430, that's Nest Labs. Oh, they're running a Nest thermostat. And then that gives an attacker information saying, hey, is there maybe an attack associated with a Nest thermostat? Is there Bluetooth on board? Is there Zigbee? Is there LoRa? Is there Z-Wave? Are these all these other technologies? Maybe there's a 0-day in Nest that's out there. Just all these things that again, you can see just from the wireless, traffic that's out. Even if it's fully encrypted, even if it, has great security on it, it still gives an attacker information about what you have out there. And how do you fix this? Well, I don't know that you necessarily do, but again, as long as you're aware of it and as long as you're cognizant of it when you're designing your network, either for your house, small business, for your large corporation, just knowing that this is what is available out there will go a long way into protecting, your clients and your employees. And so again, this is like one of these little boxes that we build that we can deploy to a client site instead of having to show up on site. But we also have covert ones that, for obvious reasons, I'm not going to show in this presentation. But the covert ones, look like everyday devices that would just sit in your normal standard office building. And we use those basically to perform all these wireless attacks that I just showed you. But we do them, if the client knows, if it's say like a red team engagement, we're going to do the devices that blend in. If the client knows, hey, we're just doing a wireless assessment, we'll send out a box like this. And really, thinking like an adversary is just putting yourself in their shoes for a little bit so that you can design a network that's strong and robust that can repel most attacks. Obviously nothing's foolproof in the world of computers. There's no 100%, but But doing a little bit goes a long way. I promise you that. So I mean, simple is not easy, right? So if you were to just check for excessive password spraying, right? If you can say that, see that, hey, this, from our wireless controller, there's a bunch of users that are getting their password sprayed, or even through Office 365. Are you getting alerts when a rogue access point pops up? Now, do you have if your controller, sends you a notification in the middle of the night, says, hey, there's a rogue access point out there. Do you have a way to go find it, to go track it down? Does your controller provide that capability? Is it something you need to add? Is that something you need to have like some hardware that maybe you have like somebody on your team that goes out and finds that? Do you have a plan in place? Have you thought about it? Just same thing like a fire drill, right? Like, do you have an exit plan to where you're going to go? Understanding what data is in clear text that you can't hide, potentially the devices like, smart home devices, those can just be seen by pretty much anybody. So understanding that, now allows you as somebody who's on the defense to basically make informed choices. And log the data. Like if your controller has the ability to log data, log it. And look at your logs. Go back through and just every so often just do a sanity check just to make sure that you don't have something sleeping in and around your network. Just doing that will go a really long way. So anyways, I shortened that up a bit because I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of questions. I'll be available in the Discord. If you want to chat there, you can find me on Twitter at Eric Escobar, or you can find me on LinkedIn too. I'm pretty much Eric Escobar everywhere that you can find me socially. But yeah, I look forward to hearing maybe stuff that y'all have done out there. I look forward to hearing, maybe ways that you've attacked clients or your own network, and gained access in conventional ways that maybe I haven't thought of. But I'm also interested if you're out there and you have defended your wireless network successfully. What did you do right? Was it hard to get it configured? Is there a certain tool in place that you'd recommend? These are all things that I always feel funny when I'm giving a talk or when I'm like on a podium somewhere. Obviously, right now this is just digital and virtual and on demand, but I think the conversation is important. I think it's important to tell stories and learn from everybody because not everybody has the answers. And yeah, that's really how we're gonna get further here. So again, before I die and choke to death, you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn. I believe my email is probably even in the notes for this as well. So have a good one and stay safe.